Hi, I'm Dr. Cindy Dupuy. I do diagnostic evaluations, advocacy, and intervention. I have a PhD in learning disabilities. I'm also an adult with dyslexia and dysgraphia.
Kim Sharman. I'm a reading and writing remediation specialist working with kids with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and other challenges. And I work with kids kindergarten through college.
And you yourself have
ADHD.
which I think you need to start including because I think it's
Okay.
valuable for people to understand that you live this as well, right?
Yeah, I do. And I compensate it in all different ways. It's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so we have thrown together a score profile. I just randomly made one up. And we thought we would kind of talk through it as it regards to reading scores, what we can kind of glean from the WISC, and how that explains what we see going on in reading. So, if you need to understand scores, we have a whole video on scores, but just to give everybody kind of metric, these are scaled scores with a mean of 10. These are standard scores with a mean of 100. Here's your percentile rank, which means, for example, on this particular task, the kid would beat 84 out of 100 kids their age. On this task, they would beat 9 out of 100 kids their age. And then the score in this last column says that the score on that measure is lower than we would expect given their general ability index score. And if you need to know how you get to a general ability index score, we've got a video on that as well. Okay. So the thing that we want to talk about is this profile relative to reading scores. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So Kim, when you first look at this, because you read a lot of my diagnostic reports, what jumps out to you in looking at this profile?
Um, so the digit span and the coding are pretty big standard deviations away from the norm. And that I know that's going to affect reading
Okay.
because I can tell that
Why would you think coding would affect reading? Just curious, because I would reach that conclusion myself, but
I thought coding, I mean, I thought
coding is that here's the numbers, here's the symbol, translate.
because you have to associate the, okay, I'm wrong. Maybe we should,
That's why we're here to talk about this, because people
okay,
get misconceptions, right?
okay,
So that coding has a visual memory component to it, and the visual memory can play a role, but there's some other interesting stuff going on here. Okay. And this is, Kim, part of the reason we have you do this is you're a real parent.
yeah.
And people will come and say, well, the coding score is low, so it's going to affect the reading. And there's this
I always, I
assumption, and
think the
that's
problem is in my mind, I have decoding in my mind.
yes, that's a
Yes.
possibility.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I look at this, the first thing that pops out to me is the exact opposite of what you looked at. I look
Okay.
at high scores and I go, wow, this kid has got some rockin' verbal skills.
That's
Right.
true. Yep.
So where do kids typically acquire vocabulary? How do they acquire vocabulary?
They, and in multiple ways. Some kids listen to adults speak, listen to TED Talks or podcasts, or listen to books on tape.
Mhm.
Some kids read.
Okay, so most kids, once we get into higher grades, build vocabulary through reading.
Yep.
Okay. This child, which we're calling Jane Reader, ironically, um, could or could not be doing that. Okay. But they've got a robust vocabulary. They've got foundations to be good processors of language. Okay. So
Yes.
um, listening precedes speaking, reading precedes writing. You have to listen to be able to read. You have to speak to be able to write. You have to read to be able to write. Okay.
Yes.
So when I see
And
a
those
kid,
are very high scores. Those are great scores.
yeah, when I see that, I say, okay, this kid has got the listening and the speaking in place.
Mhm.
And then when we glance at reading scores, it's like, what's going on here?
Yep.
Okay. This is a common profile that I see, and I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. I see this profile all the time. Okay. So let's take a look at the reading scores. And Kim, what strikes you about the reading scores?
Oh, they're just so sad. I mean, there's so low in percentage. This kid is really struggling, and how are they going to ever live up to their abilities with this kind of decoding skills and reading skills?
Okay, so you're looking at the discrepancies, and most people don't have that discrepancy column filled in, which doesn't help them understand the severity of the issue.
Oh, so 3%, of the
Yeah.
population,
So,
which is
yeah.
very
So,
unusual.
yeah. So the other thing that pops out to me again, and I'm looking at it from a different perspective. So the composite reading score falls within the range that's expected for that general ability index score of 105.
Oh, with the IQ, I see. Mm-hmm.
So the school district is likely to come back and say the composite reading is fine, so there is no problem.
Yes.
Okay. Why do you know why the composite reading is okay, Kim?
Well, because each district or each state has a particular set of standard. Nope.
No. So the composite reading score on this battery is okay because the kid's reading comprehension, which is added, and by the way, I've randomly made up these numbers. So if you go look this up in the tables, if you're a clinical psychologist or a school psychologist, I just made these numbers up. So they probably are not 100% correct, and I apologize for that. But the reading comprehension combined with the letter word recognition is high enough that the composite reading score is okay, because the composite reading is letter and word recognition combined with reading comprehension. It's the average of those two.
Oh, wait,
Okay.
who says it's okay?
Well, if we're looking at a discrepancy model, which many school districts do, they would say an 88 is within expectations for a general ability index score of 105. So they would say the reading looks okay. Now, yes, we've got this little fluency piece. They would look at the nonsense word decoding. They would look at the word recognition fluency and the decoding fluency and say, okay, those scores are low, so they're not a fast reader. That's what most people would see.
So you're saying because their IQ is average, it's okay for them to have a composite of reading plus nonsense word decoding, and that goes along with their IQ?
So the letter word recognition and the reading comprehension combines together to give you your composite reading score.
Right.
Nonsense word decoding
Oh,
in
sorry.
conjunction with letter word recognition gives you your decoding composite.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that shows an issue. And then the word recognition fluency and the decoding fluency shows an issue. Okay.
Mm.
I look at this profile and I say the kid is using their strong verbal skills to help them when they can't decode a word in context
Mm-hmm.
to get close enough to the meaning to be able to answer the reading comprehension questions.
I see
You
what
go
you're saying.
back and reread as many times as they need to. So they're shoring up
Mm-hmm.
their reading skills, and it makes it look like they're okay. You
Because
and
they have
I look at this.
they have great verbal comprehension and vocabulary they've acquired because of a gift they have. It makes it look like their reading's okay, and it's not.
Right. Now, the ones that jump out most to you and I, and the one that you and I tend to look at very first, is the nonsense word decoding.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that particularly important to you, Kim, who does reading intervention?
It's so critical because nonsense word decoding, because we speak the lowest level of language 80% of the time, it's called Anglo-Saxon, kids tend to memorize words. And so they start memorizing the picture of the word associated with the sound that the word makes. But nonsense word decoding allows you as a remediation person to see if they really know the individual sounds, the phonemes within language, and the individual rules associated where those sounds are placed in words. And if they can't do it, something's up.
Okay. Now,
Nonsense words are critical.
the other thing that jumps out to me in this profile is the significant difference between the letter word recognition and the word recognition fluency. Okay. So on the letter word recognition, you look at a word and you tell me what the word says, if you will. You read the word. Okay. I watch kid after kid after kid. They'll read a word, they'll misread it, they'll recognize the word, and then they'll self-correct, especially when you have a high verbal comprehension score. So they will say, oh, it's this word. They'll recognize it from their vocabulary. So they're not actually reading it per se. They're guessing based at context of what they can decode of it. Okay.
I never understood the difference between letter word recognition versus word recognition fluency.
Okay. So on the word recognition fluency task, I give you a page of words. They start off very simple and they go to very complex. Then I time how many words you can read correctly in a particular time period. And we do it for 2 trials.
So the word recognition fluency is timed.
Yes.
Okay.
I apologize for the balloons. So it follows parallel to the letter and word recognition. So it follows single closed syllable CVC words to vowel consonant E syllable type words, and they progress down, right? And so when you go to that word recognition fluency, it's the same words, but now I'm same kinds of words, same patterns of words in terms of complexity to decode them, but now I'm timing you, okay? And because I'm timing you, you remember we talked about the kid that will hear the word, recognize that it's not the right word, and then self-correct it. They don't have the time to do that on the word recognition fluency. Does that make sense?
Wow. Yes, I did not realize that was the difference between the two.
Okay. Now look at the nonsense word decoding and the decoding fluency. Okay. So the nonsense word decoding is I give you nonsense words. Oh, I'm trying to think of a nonsense word.
LEB,
Leb,
L-E-B.
that's a great one. Okay. So you look at those, you try and guess at them. We move to the decoding fluency, same thing. I give you the same, here's an array of simple nonsense words to complex nonsense words. How many can you read within a time constraint? 2 trials, parallel in terms of some single syllable CVC progressing, right? And I see how quickly you can read them under time constraints.
So
Okay.
does fluency also always mean that you're timing things, or just in this particular instance?
Fluency typically means a measure is timed.
I did not know that. Okay.
Okay. So when I look at this profile, this to me, my sniffer is up that this kid likely has dyslexia. Highly likely has dyslexia because the nonsense word decoding, both the timed and the untimed, are particularly low. The letter word recognition is, it's not horrific. It's not completely in the dumps. And we've seen some really low letter word recognition scores. But when we time them on those, we score drops again, which means they're not automatically and correctly decoding. Okay. And their whole profile to me screams there's issues here. They're compensating on the reading comprehension task with their high verbal comprehension.
But this is never explained to parents in the meeting with the district in regards to understanding the scores and what it truly means. They're just saying, oh, on average, he
Right.
matches with his general ability index.
I frequently see school districts or private practitioners will look at the composite reading and score and say, it's within what we would expect when we look up on our severe discrepancy table, so there is no problem.
So this is why it is so critical that parents understand this on a much deeper level to question.
But also, most school psychologists and clinical psychologists don't have the terror part of what do the scores mean and why. Like, if you look in the DSM-5, dyslexia is mentioned, but they don't have criteria for what makes an individual dyslexic. So most clinical psychologists who do occasional tests aren't necessarily deeply trained in dyslexia. They're deeply trained in how to do therapy.
Hmm.
Like, most clinical psychologists become clinical psychologists because they want to provide therapy for people. And assessment is a tiny portion of their program, unless they decide to specialize in that. And so they don't always know the pattern of scores to understand what's happening and why. They're looking at, do I meet the criteria level or not? And if I don't, I do have school psychologists. I have run into school psychologists that would look at this profile and say, yes, something is going on here. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but clearly we've got enough that are low. There's something happening here. But they'll focus then on reading fluency, not decoding.
Hmm.
Does that kind of make sense?
So this was very helpful to me because your ding, ding, ding is, look, can you go up to the top page again? Is really, you say, wow, this kid has a 79% verbal comprehension. And then you're going down and saying, but he's having trouble decoding. And the reason why his reading comprehension looks good is because he's using his gift of his
Her. And
verbal.
sorry, the age is completely whacked. I just, again, randomized, put in data. So don't look at all of that particular stuff. But yes, high verbal comprehension skills will allow kids to compensate on some tasks, and it will mask the underlying issue.
Would you also be suspicious in regards to the quality of this test in regards to his IQ, because the verbal comprehension is so high? It's so much higher than the,
Um,
or not really? You can't make that.
I personally would go back and do some analysis.
Mhm.
Did matrix reasoning have spottiness? Did they get some right and then miss some, and get some right and miss some, and get some right and miss some? What happened on figure weights that they did particularly well? What's the pattern? So I will dive in and go deeper and want to understand what's going on. But that's something that I naturally do. Just the scores in and of itself,
Mm.
and if we're just thinking about the IQ test relative to reading, the
Yes.
thing that jumps out to me is this kid is likely dyslexic,
Hmm.
very likely dyslexic.
Okay.
And if I were the parent and I had gotten this from the school district, I would want the following tests. I would want a test of phonological processing or phonemic awareness, or understanding their ability to hear and manipulate sounds. So my go-to test on that is the CTOP. I don't like the KTA's phonemic awareness test because I think it's too short and it's too easy. It combines too many skills. And so a kid with robust skills in one area can look overall pretty good.
And what's the acronym for the CTOP?
Comprehensive test of phonological processing.
So CTOPP. So people need to know that. Okay.
I would want a rapid automatic naming test.
RAN.
So the RAN-RAS, which is by Marion Wolf, or I like the rapid automatic naming on the Kaufman on the KABC. Okay.
And
So
these two tests do not take a lot of time, do they?
They don't.
So quick, you guys, so
The
quick.
CTOP is 15, 20 minutes.
Mhm.
The CTOP also has a ran on it, so you could use the CTOPS ran. Okay.
And this is reasonable to ask for this, isn't it?
Yes, as long as the
Okay.
clinician has got access to the test. It's a
Unreasonable.
powerful measure when done correctly. And the trick of it is to make sure that the clinician knows their phonemes themselves, so they don't say ruh versus right?
Right.
But so we ask for those two tests. My other sniffer in all of this is going to say, if you're having problems with reading, you're likely having problems in writing, and I would want to see where your spelling score is.
And how would you get a spelling score?
So the KBC, sorry, the KTA, acronym city, the KTA has a spelling measure on it. There are other measures of spelling. So there's real word spelling, there's nonsense word spelling on the Woodcock-Johnson. So those are valuable. My favorite go-to of all-time tests is the gray oral reading. So if I see a kid with this profile, I want a GORT. Because they read the passage, they have to read it out loud as fast and as accurately as possible. The passage is then taken away and they have to answer comprehension questions without looking back at the passage. And often you will see a very significant difference between the reading comprehension on the KABC relative to the reading comprehension score on the gray oral reading test.
Why?
Because they can't look back at the passage. It's all from memory, and they're having to decode fluidly and out loud, and it pounds on their ability to fast and accurately decode when they're reading aloud. And you can watch that reading comprehension score just deteriorate. When I read in my head, I can self-correct using my strong vocabulary.
And these tests that Cindy just mentioned, I mean, these really are being done now sometimes in the younger grades, because you can identify kids that have the potential for these reading disorders such as dyslexia in kindergarten. We found out for my kid, I saw it was a phonemic awareness test, took her to a speech and language pathologist, rapid automatic naming test, and it was done.